Picture this. You're the most powerful man in the world, scrolling through your ancient equivalent of Instagram at 2 a.m. And suddenly you see her. One rooftop selfie changes everything. Careers destroyed, families shattered, murder plots hatched, all because a king couldn't keep his eyes to himself. Welcome to the story of Bathsheba, the woman history painted as a seductress, but who might just be the Bible's most misunderstood victim. Spoiler alert, everything you think you know about this story is probably wrong. Still think ancient scandals can't compete with modern drama? Hit that subscribe button. You're about to get an education in how power, lust, and cover-ups haven't changed in 3,000 years. Let me set the scene for you, because context is everything, and most people skip right past it like terms of service agreements. We're talking about ancient Israel, around 1000 BCE, when Jerusalem was basically the New York City of the ancient world. If New York was built on a hill, surrounded by enemies, and ruled by a guy who collected wives like Pokemon cards. King David. You know the name. Giant slayer, psalm writer, the golden boy of the Old Testament. By this point in his career, he's reached that dangerous level of success where people stop telling him no. Think Jeff Bezos meets Alexander the Great, with a harp and a really good publicist. He's got multiple palaces, a standing army, and enough political clout to make modern politicians weep with envy. But here's the thing about power. It's like that friend who always wants to go just one more bar at 2 a.m. It never knows when to stop. And it always leads to questionable decisions. Spring has arrived in Jerusalem, which ancient texts tell us was the time when kings go out to battle. Imagine having a season specifically designated for warfare, like how we have pumpkin spice season but with more bloodshed and territorial expansion. David's generals are off playing the ancient equivalent of Risk with real armies, conquering the Ammonites, while David stays home. And that's where our story really begins, with a king who's supposed to be at war, lounging around his palace like a medieval trust fund baby. Picture the royal residence, sprawling courtyards, multiple levels, servants scurrying about like ancient Roombas in robes. The palace sits high on Jerusalem's ridge, offering commanding views of the city below. It's the perfect setup for what's about to unfold, a vantage point that gives David visual access to the private lives of his subjects. Now, let's talk about Bathsheba. Her name literally means daughter of the oath, or seventh daughter. Either way, it screams important family lineage. This isn't some random peasant girl. Her grandfather was Ahithophel, one of David's most trusted advisors, basically the ancient equivalent of a Supreme Court justice crossed with a chief of staff. Her husband Uriah is serving in David's elite special forces unit, the 30, fighting loyally for his king while David enjoys the comforts of home. The text tells us Bathsheba was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. Modern readers often gloss over this detail, but it's crucial. In ancient Jewish law, this ritual cleansing had specific timing and meaning. It wasn't just about hygiene. It was a religious requirement that happened at a very particular time in a woman's cycle. This detail will become devastatingly important later, like a loaded gun mentioned in Act 1. So here we have David, wandering his palace in the late afternoon. Maybe he's restless. Maybe he's bored. Maybe he's experiencing what we'd now recognize as the dangerous combination of unchecked power and too much free time. He steps out onto his roof. Ancient palaces had flat rooftops that served as additional living space, outdoor rooms with views. And that's when he sees her. Bathsheba is bathing, performing her ritual purification, in what she reasonably assumes is the privacy of her own courtyard. Remember, this is an era before window screens, privacy fences, or any modern concept of visual boundaries. Courtyards were designed to be private family spaces, but David's elevated position turns him into an accidental, or perhaps intentional voyeur. Now here's where most Sunday school teachers start tap dancing around the uncomfortable details. The traditional narrative paints Bathsheba as a seductress, a temptress who somehow orchestrated this whole scenario. But let's think about this logically for a moment, shall we? She's in her own home, performing a religious obligation during daylight hours. If she wanted to seduce the king, wouldn't there be more efficient methods than hoping he'd randomly wander onto his roof at exactly the right moment and happen to look in exactly the right direction? It's like saying someone planned to get discovered by paparazzi while taking out their trash in pajamas. The power dynamic here is crucial, and it's one that makes modern readers deeply uncomfortable. David isn't just any man, he's the king. In ancient monarchies, The king's desire carried the weight of law. When David saw Bathsheba and sent someone to inquire about her, this wasn't casual neighborhood gossip. This was royal intelligence gathering, the ancient equivalent of having the FBI run a background check because you noticed someone attractive. The inquiry reveals key information. She's married to Uriah the Hittite, one of his own soldiers currently serving in combat. This should be a stop sign the size of a billboard. In ancient Israel, adultery wasn't just morally prohibited, it was a capital offense. We're not talking about divorce court here, we're talking about public stoning. But power has a way of making inconvenient laws feel more like suggestions. David sent messengers to get her, not invited her over, not asked if she'd like to visit. The language is important. This is a royal summons. When the king sends messengers to fetch you, you don't RSVP, you don't check your calendar, you go immediately. Imagine receiving a text that says the president wants to see you. Cars outside. Except in David's time, refusing wasn't just career suicide. It could be actual suicide. The chapter ends with 3 simple, devastating words. And she came. And she came. 3 words that have launched 1,000 sermons and twice as many judgmental assumptions. But let's pause here and really examine what's happening, because the devil, as they say, is in the details. And the details reveal a story far more complex than your Sunday school flannel board ever suggested. When we say she came, we need to understand what ancient royal summons actually meant. This wasn't like getting a LinkedIn invitation or a casual want to grab coffee. This was the Bronze Age equivalent of receiving a subpoena from the Supreme Court, except the person issuing it also controlled the military, the treasury, and could have you executed for looking at him wrong. David's messengers arrive at Bathsheba's door. These aren't delivery boys or casual acquaintances. These are royal officials, probably armed, definitely authorized to use whatever force necessary to ensure compliance. Picture the Secret Service showing up at your house, except they work for someone who makes medieval kings look like constitutional liberals. What do you think went through Bathsheba's mind? Her husband is away at war, fighting for this very king. Her grandfather serves in David's inner circle. Her entire family's position, wealth, and safety depend on royal favor. And now the king himself wants to see her. Immediately. The text doesn't record any conversation between Bathsheba and these messengers. No negotiation, no questions about timing or purpose. The narrative moves with terrifying efficiency from summons to arrival, suggesting that whatever internal debate Bathsheba might have had was irrelevant to the outcome. She came. Now, let's talk about what happened next, because this is where things get really uncomfortable for anyone trying to frame this as a consensual affair between equals. The text states, with brutal simplicity, David lay with her, not they made love, not they had an affair. The Hebrew verb used here, shakab, often appears in contexts of power and conquest. It's the same word used when describing what happens to captives of war. The language itself suggests something that's done to someone, not something done with someone. Modern readers, especially those comfortable with contemporary ideas about consent and equality, often project romantic notions onto this encounter. We want to believe there was attraction, chemistry, maybe even love. But consider the context. A king in his palace, a woman summoned by royal decree, no witnesses mentioned, no conversation recorded. This isn't 50 Shades of Ancient Israel. This is a case study in how absolute power corrupts absolutely, and how societies have always found ways to blame women for men's failures of character. After the encounter, Bathsheba returns home. The text doesn't describe her emotional state, her thoughts, or her feelings. She simply disappears from the narrative, like a character written out of a story once her plot function is served. But her absence from the text doesn't mean her story ends. It means her agency has been removed from the narrative, just as it was removed from her life. Time passes. Days turn into weeks. And then comes the message that changes everything. I am pregnant. 2 words in Hebrew. Hira, Anochi. Simple, direct, catastrophic. In our modern context, an unplanned pregnancy might mean difficult conversations, changed plans, maybe some awkward family dinners. In ancient Israel, for a married woman whose husband has been away at war for months, pregnancy meant death, not metaphorical death. Actual, literal, public execution by stoning. The law was clear and brutal. Adultery was a capital offense for both parties. There were no exceptions for royal involvement. no diplomatic immunity for sleeping with the king. If anything, the royal connection might make the punishment more severe, not less, as a warning to others about the consequences of violating royal marriages. Bathsheba sends word to David, not because she's trying to trap him into a relationship or because she's scheming for royal position. She's informing him that his actions have created a situation that will result in her death unless something is done immediately. This is where David's character truly reveals itself. A man of integrity might confess, accept responsibility, face the consequences of his actions. A wise leader might find a way to quietly resolve the situation without further harm. A decent human being might feel remorse, guilt, or at least concern for the innocent life he's endangered. David does none of these things. Instead, he immediately begins calculating, how can he cover this up? How can he escape responsibility? How can he manipulate the situation to protect himself, regardless of the cost to others? His first thought isn't, I need to make this right. It's, I need to make this go away. The wheels start turning immediately. David's solution reveals both his cleverness and his complete moral bankruptcy. Bring Uriah home from the war. If Uriah sleeps with his wife, the pregnancy can be attributed to him. Problem solved. Reputation intact. No awkward questions asked. It's brilliant, really. Diabolical, but brilliant. Uriah is loyal, devoted, fighting for king and country. He'll be thrilled to receive an unexpected furlough. He'll rush home to his beautiful wife. They'll have their reunion. And 9 months later, everyone will celebrate the birth of Uriah and Bathsheba's child. David remains the hero king. Bathsheba lives, and Uriah never knows his wife was violated by his sovereign. It's the perfect cover-up, except for one small problem that David hasn't considered. What if Uriah turns out to have more integrity than the king he serves? What if loyalty to his fellow soldiers matters more to Uriah than personal comfort? What if this decorated war hero has principles that can't be bought, manipulated, or overruled by royal convenience? David sends for Uriah, confident in his ability to orchestrate the solution. After all, he's the king. People do what he tells them to do. Men think with their appetites. Soldiers want rest and pleasure. What could possibly go wrong? Uriah the Hittite receives his orders like any good soldier, without question, with immediate compliance, and probably with a mixture of confusion and excitement. Combat deployments in ancient times weren't like modern rotations with scheduled leave and video calls home. When armies marched out, they stayed out until the campaign ended, which could be months or even years. So when royal messengers arrive at the siege lines with orders for Uriah to report to Jerusalem immediately, it's unprecedented. His fellow soldiers probably assumed he was either in serious trouble or about to receive an extraordinary honor. Neither explanation made much sense. Uriah was a model soldier, one of David's elite 30, known for his loyalty and courage. The journey from the battlefield to Jerusalem would have taken days, giving Uriah plenty of time to wonder what could be so urgent that the king would recall a single soldier during active warfare. Maybe David needed his counsel on military matters. Maybe there was a special mission requiring his particular skills. Maybe his wife was ill. He arrives in Jerusalem, dusty from travel, still wearing his battle gear, and reports directly to the palace. David greets him warmly, too warmly perhaps. For a routine military briefing, the king asks about the war, about Joab, his general, about how the siege is progressing. Standard debriefing questions. Nothing unusual. Then David says something that should be perfectly reasonable. Go down to your house and wash your feet. In ancient Middle Eastern culture, wash your feet was essentially a polite way of saying go home, relax, get comfortable. It's hospitality language, the kind of thing you'd say to an honored guest. David even sends a gift after him. Food from the royal table, a gesture that signals approval and favor. Any normal soldier would be delighted. An unexpected break from combat, royal recognition, a chance to see his wife, sleep in his own bed, eat home-cooked food instead of military rations. It's like getting surprise leave during deployment, complete with the commanding officer's blessing, but Uriah doesn't go home. Instead, he sleeps at the entrance of the royal palace, with David's servants. When David learns of this the next morning, he's probably experiencing what we might recognize as the ancient equivalent of a panic attack. His entire plan depends on Uriah behaving like a normal human being with normal desires and normal priorities. David calls Uriah back for another conversation. Haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home? It's a reasonable question with an obvious answer. Of course he should go home. Of course he should see his wife. What soldier wouldn't want that? Uriah's response reveals the kind of character that makes David's manipulation not just immoral, but tragically ironic. The Ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. Let that sink in for a moment. While David has been lounging in his palace, enjoying royal comforts and abusing royal power, Uriah embodies the very principles David claims to represent. The Ark, the sacred symbol of God's presence, is in a temporary tent on the battlefield. The army is sleeping under the stars, facing danger and hardship, and Uriah refuses to enjoy pleasures that his brothers in arms cannot share. This is integrity, so pure it's almost painful to witness. Uriah isn't making a political statement or trying to impress anyone. He's simply living according to a moral code that won't allow him to indulge in personal comfort while his fellow soldiers suffer. It's the ancient equivalent of a Navy SEAL refusing to leave base for dinner while his team is still on a dangerous mission. Military brotherhood at its finest, loyalty elevated to principle, sacrifice chosen over self-interest. David must be internally screaming at this point. Here's this inconveniently noble soldier, this walking embodiment of everything David pretends to be, unknowingly torpedoing the king's cover-up, simply by being decent. So David tries a different approach. He invites Uriah to dinner and gets him drunk. This isn't social drinking. This isn't hospitality. This is calculated manipulation, using alcohol to break down the moral resistance that sobriety maintains. David figures that enough wine will override Uriah's principles, that base instinct will triumph over noble ideals. But even drunk, Uriah doesn't go home. He sleeps again with the palace servants, still unwilling to enjoy comforts denied to his comrades. Think about what this means. Even impaired by alcohol, even given explicit royal permission, even encouraged by his commanding officer, Uriah's moral compass remains true. His integrity isn't performance or calculation. It's so deeply embedded in his character that even wine can't wash it away. David's plan isn't just failing, it's being destroyed by the very qualities he should admire and emulate in his subjects. The king's corruption is being highlighted by his soldiers' virtue, creating a contrast so stark it's almost biblical, which of course it literally is. At this point, David has a choice. He could confess, accept responsibility, and deal with the consequences of his actions like a man and a leader. He could find another solution that doesn't require compromising Uriah's principles or endangering innocent lives. He could, in short, rise to the level of integrity displayed by his own soldier. Instead, David makes a decision that transforms this story from royal misconduct into something far darker. If Uriah won't cooperate with the cover-up, if his inconvenient nobility threatens David's reputation, if this loyal soldier's very existence creates problems for the king, well then, maybe it's time to solve the Uriah problem permanently. The next morning, David writes a letter. He seals it with the royal seal, making it an official order that cannot be questioned or disobeyed. And then, in a move that combines cruelty with cynicism in breathtaking proportion, he hands the sealed letter to Uriah himself and tells him to carry it back to Joab at the front lines. Uriah takes the letter without question. Because loyal soldiers don't read their commanding officer's mail, he has no idea he's carrying his own death warrant. Picture this. You're asked to deliver a sealed envelope to your boss, and you trust your employer so completely that it never occurs to you to peek inside. Now imagine that envelope contains instructions for your elimination. That's exactly what Uriah the Hittite carries as he makes his way back to the siege lines, dutiful and unsuspecting, holding his own death warrant in hands still loyal to the king who signed it. David's letter to Joab is a masterclass in plausible deniability. It reads, "Put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die." Notice the careful phrasing. David doesn't order Joab to murder Uriah outright. That would be too obvious, too traceable. Instead, he crafts what modern intelligence agencies might recognize as a perfect black op. Create conditions that make death appear accidental while ensuring the outcome is anything but. It's assassination disguised as battlefield casualty, murder masquerading as military misfortune. David wants Uriah dead, but he also wants clean hands and a clear conscience. He wants the problem solved without accepting responsibility for the solution. Joab, David's military commander, receives this letter and probably doesn't even blink. Ancient warfare was brutal and chaotic. Soldiers died all the time in ways that could appear random or strategic, depending on how you framed the narrative. One more casualty, even of an elite soldier, wouldn't raise suspicions if handled correctly. But Joab is smarter than David gives him credit for. He reads between the lines and understands exactly what's being asked of him. This isn't about military strategy or tactical necessity. This is about political convenience and personal protection. The king wants one of his best soldiers eliminated for reasons that have nothing to do with warfare. Rather than orchestrate an elaborate solo death for Uriah, Joab makes a calculated decision. He'll follow the spirit of David's order while protecting himself from future blame. If David wants Uriah dead in battle, fine. But other soldiers will die too, making it impossible to trace this back to a personal vendetta. Joab assigns Uriah to a position near the city wall, where enemy defenders are strongest. But he doesn't just abandon Uriah alone. He places several soldiers in the same vulnerable position. When he withdraws support, multiple men die. Not just the intended target, it's mass casualty murder disguised as tactical miscalculation. The attack unfolds exactly as planned. Enemy forces surge from the city, catching the exposed soldiers without backup. Uriah fights bravely, as he always has. But courage can't overcome impossible odds and deliberate abandonment. He dies defending a position his own commanding officer set him up to lose. Killed by enemies, but betrayed by allies. When the dust settles, Joab has his cover story ready. It wasn't assassination, it was overly aggressive tactics that cost several good soldiers their lives. Military operations involve risk, and sometimes mistakes happen. These things occur in war, nothing suspicious, nothing personal, just the tragic cost of combat operations. Joab sends a messenger back to Jerusalem with careful instructions about how to report the casualties. He knows David will initially be angry about the military losses. Other soldiers died too, and that complicates the narrative. But then the messenger is to mention, almost as an afterthought, also your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. The messenger delivers his report exactly as instructed. David responds predictably, criticizing the tactical decision that led to unnecessary casualties. He puts on a performance of royal concern for his soldiers' welfare, demonstrating appropriate leadership disappointment over military losses. Then comes the crucial moment. Also, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. David's response reveals everything about his character. Say this to Joab, don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab. Translation, mission accomplished. Don't feel bad about it. Casualties happen in war. Keep up the good work. No mourning for a loyal soldier. No investigation into tactical failures. No questions about how one of his elite fighters ended up in such a vulnerable position. David treats Uriah's death as an acceptable loss in pursuit of larger objectives, which, from David's perspective, it absolutely is. The cover-up is complete. Uriah is dead. The pregnancy can now be attributed to royal grief comfort rather than royal misconduct, and David's reputation remains intact. It's a perfect crime, executed through legitimate channels with plausible explanations and minimal traceable evidence. But here's what David hasn't considered. Joab now knows exactly what kind of man his king really is. The general has been made complicit in regicide, the murder of one of David's own elite soldiers for personal convenience. That's not information Joab will forget. And it's not leverage he'll waste. From this moment forward, Joab owns David in ways the king doesn't yet understand. When you ask someone to commit murder on your behalf, you create a permanent relationship of mutual assured destruction. David may think he's solved his problem, but he's actually created a much larger one. He's given his military commander blackmail material that will influence their relationship for years to come. Meanwhile, back in Jerusalem, Bathsheba receives the news of her husband's death. The text tells us she mourned for him, following proper customs and social expectations, but it doesn't tell us what she's thinking, feeling, or understanding about the timing and circumstances of Uriah's convenient demise. Does she suspect? How could she not? Her husband leaves for war healthy and confident, gets recalled to Jerusalem briefly, returns to battle, and dies almost immediately in what's reported as a tactical miscalculation. The coincidence is breathtaking, the timing suspicious, the outcome perfectly convenient for the king who needed this problem solved. But suspicion and proof are different things, and accusation without evidence is suicide. Bathsheba finds herself trapped in a web of complicity she never chose, mourning a husband whose death may have been orchestrated by the man who violated her. After the appropriate mourning period ends, David sends for Bathsheba again. This time, it's not a summons for secret encounter, it's an official royal marriage proposal. The widow becomes the queen. The victim becomes the accomplice. The cover-up becomes complete. After Bathsheba's mourning period ends, and ancient mourning periods were precisely calculated, socially mandated affairs, not casual suggestions, David makes his next move. He sends for her again, but this time the summons comes with a very different purpose: marriage. Let's pause here and consider what this proposal actually represents, because calling it a wedding is like calling a hostile corporate takeover a merger. This isn't romance, it's damage control. Elevated to state policy, David needs to legitimize the pregnancy, transform the scandal into succession planning, and convert his victim into his accomplice. Marriage accomplishes all three objectives simultaneously while adding a veneer of respectability to the entire sordid affair. For Bathsheba, this isn't an invitation, it's a royal decree wrapped in ceremonial ribbons. She has no choice in the matter, just as she had no choice in any of the events that led to this moment. The king who summoned her, violated her, orchestrated her husband's murder, and left her pregnant with his child, is now offering the only possible path to survival: become his wife, refuse, and face execution for adultery, accept, and become complicit in covering up her own assault and her husband's murder. It's Sophie's choice, with a crown and a wedding veil. The marriage ceremony itself would have been a grand affair. David spares no expense in making this look like a legitimate royal romance rather than an elaborate cover-up. Ancient royal weddings were political theatre designed to demonstrate power, wealth, and divine favour. This one has the additional purpose of rewriting recent history in real time. Imagine the guest list: nobles who suspect but dare not speak, advisors who know but must remain silent, family members who understand the truth but can't acknowledge it. Everyone plays their role in the performance, pretending this is a joyous occasion rather than the final act of a carefully orchestrated crime. Bathsheba's grandfather, Ahithophel, the wise counselor, stands among the wedding guests, watching his granddaughter marry the man who murdered her first husband. What must be going through his mind? He's one of David's most trusted advisors, privy to royal secrets and political machinations. He certainly understands the timing, the circumstances, the convenient coincidences that led to this moment. But what can he do? Accuse the king of murder without proof? Challenge royal authority on behalf of his granddaughter? Risk his own position, his family's safety, his very life by speaking truth to power? The calculus of survival in absolute monarchies doesn't favor moral courage over political pragmatism. David's other wives attend the ceremony as well, each probably wondering if they're witnessing romance, or watching a cautionary tale about royal power and its consequences. Polygamy in ancient monarchies wasn't about personal fulfillment, it was about political alliances, succession planning, and demonstrating wealth and status. Adding Bathsheba to the collection serves multiple purposes. It solves David's immediate problem while reinforcing his image as a virile, successful king who attracts beautiful women. The wedding feast would have lasted days, with entertainment, speeches, and celebrations designed to embed this narrative in public memory. David wants this marriage remembered as a love story, not a cover-up. He needs witnesses who will testify to the joy and legitimacy of the occasion, should questions arise later. But beneath the pageantry and celebration, everyone who matters understands what's really happening. This is political theatre at its most cynical, a royal performance designed to transform scandal into success story. The king who murdered a loyal soldier is now celebrating his marriage to that soldier's widow, and everyone is expected to applaud. Bathsheba plays her role perfectly because she has no choice. She smiles, accepts congratulations, receives wedding gifts, and acts every inch the happy bride. But she's not just marrying David, she's agreeing to participate in the mythology that will surround their relationship. She's consenting to be remembered as the woman who seduced a king rather than the woman who was violated by one. The pregnancy, now safely legitimized by marriage, continues without scandal. When the child is born, he'll be a prince, not a bastard. The timeline will work perfectly. married in month 3, baby born in month 9. Everyone can do the math and reach acceptable conclusions. It's a masterclass in narrative manipulation, the ancient equivalent of a successful PR campaign that transforms liability into asset. David has converted his greatest vulnerability into a demonstration of his power and appeal. The story becomes: the king saw a beautiful woman, was smitten by love, tragically lost her husband in battle, and nobly married the widow to provide for her and her child. It's romantic, it's heroic, it's complete fiction. But fiction backed by royal authority becomes official history, and official history shapes public memory. David understands that controlling the narrative is more important than controlling the truth. People will believe what serves their interests to believe, and it serves everyone's interests to believe the romantic version rather than the criminal one. The wedding guests disperse, carrying stories of royal romance back to their own circles. The musicians compose songs about the king's great love for his beautiful new queen. The court historians record the marriage as another example of David's blessed life and God's favor upon his reign. Within months, the alternative version of events, assault, cover-up, murder, coercion, will seem like malicious gossip compared to the official narrative of love, loss, and royal magnanimity. David has successfully rewritten history in real time, transforming the victims of his crimes into beneficiaries of his generosity. But there's one problem with cover-ups, even perfect ones. They require the cooperation of everyone involved, and they assume that moral consequences can be managed like political ones. David has controlled the human witnesses, manipulated the social narrative, and eliminated the inconvenient evidence. What he hasn't considered is that some witnesses can't be bought, threatened, or eliminated. Some observers exist outside the reach of royal authority and political manipulation. And one of those observers has been watching this entire charade with growing displeasure, preparing to deliver a judgment that no amount of spin can deflect or damage control can contain. The thing about divine justice is that it doesn't care about your public approval ratings. Time passes. The royal couple settles into their new life together, and from the outside, everything looks perfectly normal. David has successfully integrated Bathsheba into his household, and she's adapted to her role as one of his wives. The pregnancy progresses without complications. The court functions smoothly, and the kingdom continues to prosper under David's leadership. But if you think this story ends with happily ever after, you haven't been paying attention to how these ancient narratives work. The Bible isn't a romance novel, it's a moral accounting system with divine auditors who never miss a deadline. Enter Nathan, the prophet. Now, prophets in ancient Israel weren't like modern religious figures who offer comfort and encouragement during Sunday services. These were God's prosecuting attorneys, divine district attorneys, who showed up when someone in power needed to be held accountable. They had diplomatic immunity that came directly from heaven, and absolutely zero concern for political convenience or royal feelings. Nathan had a long history with David. He delivered good news before, promising David that his dynasty would last forever, that God favored his reign, that his kingdom would prosper. Nathan was the prophet who told David he could build a temple, who confirmed divine blessing on his military campaigns, who served as the spiritual advisor to the royal court. But today, Nathan isn't coming with congratulations or encouragement. Today, he's coming with a subpoena from the highest court in the universe. Picture Nathan preparing for this confrontation. He knows exactly what David has done. Prophets don't operate on human intelligence networks. They get their information directly from the source. Nathan has been watching this entire sordid affair unfold, probably hoping David would come to his senses, confess his crimes, and make things right on his own. But David hasn't confessed. He's doubled down on the cover-up, celebrated the marriage, and settled into his new normal, as if nothing happened. He's treating his crimes like their political successes, his victims like their beneficiaries, and his cover-up like it's evidence of his wisdom and power. Time for divine intervention. Nathan arrives at the palace and requests an audience with the king. This isn't unusual. Prophets and kings maintained regular contact for spiritual guidance and policy consultation. David probably assumes Nathan is coming with another encouraging word, or perhaps some counsel about governing challenges. Instead, Nathan tells him a story. This is crucial to understand. Nathan doesn't start with accusations or condemnations. He doesn't walk in screaming about murder and adultery. Instead, he crafts a parable, so perfectly tailored to David's psychology, that the king condemns himself before he realizes what's happening. There were 2 men in a certain town, Nathan begins. One rich and the other poor. David settles in to listen, probably assuming this is some teaching illustration about justice or governance. Kings often dealt with disputes between rich and poor citizens, so this seems like relevant professional development. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. The imagery is deliberately pastoral and intimate. David, the former shepherd boy, connects immediately with this scenario. He understands the bond between a shepherd and a beloved animal, the way poverty makes every possession precious, the tenderness that develops when you care for something vulnerable and dependent. Now a traveller came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for his guest. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. Nathan stops there. He doesn't explain the metaphor, doesn't draw connections, doesn't point fingers. He simply presents this story of breathtaking injustice and waits for David's response. And David explodes with righteous anger. As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. You must pay for that lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and had no pity. David's rage is genuine, absolute, and completely self-condemning. He's experienced true moral outrage at injustice, while remaining blind to his own far worse behavior. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a sword. Think about what just happened. David has pronounced his own death sentence with passionate conviction. He's declared that someone who steals one lamb from a poor man deserves to die, while completely missing that he stole a wife from a loyal soldier, and then had the soldier murdered to cover up his crime. The psychological dynamics here are fascinating. David can see injustice clearly when it's abstracted into story form, but he's completely unable to recognize it in his own actions. This isn't stupidity. This is the incredible power of self-deception when combined with unchecked authority. Nathan lets David's words hang in the air for a moment. The king has just demonstrated that he knows right from wrong, that he's capable of moral judgment, that he understands the principles of justice he's been violating. There can be no claim of ignorance, no appeal to different moral standards, no argument that kings operate by different rules. Then Nathan delivers the line that transforms this encounter from teaching moment to judgment day. You are the man. 4 words that shatter David's carefully constructed reality. 4 words that strip away every rationalization, every justification, every comfortable lie the king has been telling himself. 4 words that force David to see himself as he really is rather than as he pretends to be. The rich man in the story, who had vast flocks but stole from the poor, represents David, who had multiple wives, but took Uriah's only one. The beloved lamb represents Bathsheba, precious to her husband, but treated as disposable property by the powerful man who coveted her. But Nathan isn't finished. The parable was just the opening argument. Now comes the full indictment, and it's going to be devastating. You are the man. Those 4 words land like a physical blow, stripping away every comfortable delusion David has constructed around his actions. There's no misunderstanding Nathan's meaning, no room for interpretation or negotiation. The prophet has just shattered the king's carefully crafted narrative with divine precision. But Nathan isn't finished. He's just getting started. What follows is one of the most devastating character assassinations in literature, made all the more powerful because every word is absolutely true and comes with the authority of heaven itself. This isn't political opposition or personal vendetta. This is moral reckoning delivered by someone who cannot be silenced, threatened, or bought. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Nathan continues, invoking the highest possible authority before delivering his message. This isn't Nathan's opinion or interpretation. This is direct communication from the divine prosecutor who has been building a case against David. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. The indictment begins with a reminder of divine favor. God didn't just allow David to become king. He actively made it happen, protected him from Saul's murderous jealousy, and established his throne. Every blessing David enjoys came from the same source that's now calling him to account. I gave your master's house to you, and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah. This is crucial context that modern readers often miss. In ancient Near Eastern succession, Inheriting the previous king's wives was a symbol of complete political authority. When Nathan mentions Saul's wives, he's not talking about sexual conquest. He's referencing the transfer of legitimate royal power. David didn't just replace Saul, he inherited everything that came with the throne, including the political symbolism represented by the royal household. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Here's the heart of the moral outrage. David wasn't denied anything. He wasn't deprived, oppressed, or limited in his options. Whatever he wanted, he could have asked for and received through legitimate means. The crime wasn't born from necessity or desperation. It was born from selfishness and the corruption that comes with unchecked power. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? Notice the language. David didn't just break rules or make mistakes. He despised God's word. This wasn't accidental or impulsive. It was deliberate rejection of divine authority, a conscious choice to prioritize personal desire over moral obligation. You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. Nathan doesn't mince words or soften the accusation. David murdered Uriah just as surely as if he'd wielded the blade himself. The fact that he used enemy soldiers as the murder weapon doesn't change the moral reality. This was premeditated assassination of a loyal subject. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. This detail is particularly devastating because it highlights David's cowardice and cynicism. He didn't even have the courage to take direct responsibility for the murder. Instead, he manipulated circumstances so that his enemies would do the killing while he maintained plausible deniability. Then comes the judgment, and it's perfectly calibrated to match David's crimes. Now therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. David used violence to solve his problems, so violence will define his family's future. He destroyed a loyal soldier's household, so his own household will be destroyed by internal conflict. The punishment isn't arbitrary. It's poetic justice that mirrors the crime. This is what the Lord says. Out of your own household I will bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. The specific nature of this judgment is breathtaking in its precision. David secretly violated Uriah's marriage, so his own marriages will be publicly violated by someone from his inner circle. The private crime will be answered by public humiliation, the hidden sin exposed in the most shameful way possible. He did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. This is the ultimate reversal. David thought he could commit crimes in darkness and avoid consequences through cover-ups and manipulation. But divine justice operates by different rules. Secret sins receive public punishments. Hidden crimes result in open shame. David's response to this devastating indictment reveals something important about his character. I have sinned against the Lord. No excuses, no justifications, no attempts to minimize or deflect responsibility for all his faults. When confronted with undeniable truth, David doesn't try to argue his way out of accountability. He simply admits what he's done. But notice what he doesn't do. He doesn't apologize to Bathsheba for violating her, doesn't express remorse for murdering Uriah, doesn't acknowledge the pain he's caused to innocent victims. His confession focuses on his relationship with God, not his obligations to the people he's harmed. Nathan responds with both mercy and judgment. The Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die. But because by doing this you have shown utter contempt for the Lord, the son born to you will die. David's life is spared, but the consequences of his actions will still unfold. The child conceived in violence and covered up with murder will not survive. The innocent will pay the price for the guilty, a recurring theme in stories about power and its abuse. Nathan delivers his message and leaves. No negotiation, no appeals process, no political maneuvering. Divine justice doesn't operate like human courts. The verdict has been delivered, the sentence pronounced, and the consequences are now inevitable. David is left alone to contemplate the wreckage of his moral authority and the terrible price of his crimes. The perfect cover-up has been perfectly exposed, and there's nothing left to do but face the consequences. The baby conceived in sin is about to pay the ultimate price for his father's crimes. After Nathan leaves, David faces a terrible waiting period. The prophet's words hang over the palace like a death sentence, and everyone who witnessed the confrontation understands that divine judgment has been pronounced. But prophecies, unlike human punishments, unfold according to heaven's timeline, not earthly expectations. The child is born, and for a brief moment there might have been hope that Nathan's dire prediction was somehow symbolic or conditional. Ancient prophecies sometimes carried escape clauses, opportunities for repentance to alter outcomes. Perhaps intense prayer, fasting, and royal penance could change the divine verdict. But the baby becomes ill almost immediately. What follows is one of the most psychologically complex episodes in David's story, revealing depths of his character that complicate any simple moral judgment. The king who showed no mercy to Uriah, who calculated murder with cold efficiency, who manipulated everyone around him to cover up his crimes, suddenly becomes a broken father desperately pleading for his child's life. David throws himself into the kind of spiritual desperation that only impending loss can inspire. He fasts, refusing all food and drink. He sleeps on the ground instead of in his royal bed. He tears his clothes and covers himself with sackcloth, the ancient equivalent of wearing your grief and repentance as visible statements. Most dramatically, he prostrates himself before God in continuous prayer, begging for mercy, pleading for his son's life, offering any bargain that might spare the innocent child who's paying the price for royal sin. This is David at his most human, stripped of all royal pretense and political calculation. The man who could orchestrate elaborate cover-ups and manipulate circumstances with ruthless efficiency becomes powerless in the face of divine judgment. All his wealth, authority, and cunning mean nothing when confronted with consequences that can't be bribed, threatened, or manipulated away. His servants watch this royal breakdown with growing alarm. They've never seen their king like this. Vulnerable, desperate, completely out of control. David, who normally commands everyone around him, is now begging an invisible God for something no human authority can deliver. For 7 days, this continues. 7 days of fasting, prayer, and desperate pleading. 7 days of hoping that somehow divine mercy might override divine justice. 7 days of discovering that some consequences can't be avoided, no matter how powerful you are or how desperately you repent. The palace becomes a house of suspended animation. Court business continues, but everyone is watching and waiting for news about the royal child. Servants speak in whispers. Officials conduct business with nervous glances toward the royal quarters. The entire kingdom seems to hold its breath, waiting to see whether their king's repentance can change God's mind. But on the 7th day, the child dies. The servants are terrified to tell David. They've watched him spiral into desperate grief, while the child was merely sick. How will he react to news of the boy's death? They whisper among themselves, "While the child was still living, he wouldn't listen to us when we spoke to him. How can we now tell him the child is dead? He may do something desperate." It's a reasonable fear. Kings have been known to kill messengers who bring unwelcome news. David's emotional state is already fragile, and learning of his son's death might push him over the edge into violence or self-destruction. But David notices their whispering and figures out the truth without being told. "Is the child dead?" he asks directly. "Yes," they reply. "He is dead." What happens next surprises everyone and reveals yet another layer of David's complex character. Instead of exploding in rage or collapsing in deeper grief, he gets up, washes himself, changes his clothes, goes to the house of the Lord to worship, and then returns to the palace to eat. His servants are completely bewildered. They expected escalating desperation, not this sudden return to normalcy. They ask him directly, "Why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept. But now that the child is dead, you get up and eat." David's explanation reveals a theology of acceptance that's both pragmatic and profound. "While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows, the Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he is dead, why should I go on fasting? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me." This isn't callous indifference. It's the recognition that some battles are over once they're lost. David fought desperately for his son's life while there was still hope, but he doesn't waste energy on grief that can't change outcomes. The child is dead, the consequence has been paid, and continuing to mourn won't accomplish anything productive. It's a remarkably mature response to loss, especially considering the circumstances. David accepts responsibility for the chain of events that led to his son's death, without drowning in self-pity or rage against divine justice. He understands that the punishment was deserved, even if it fell on someone innocent. But there's something else happening here that's easy to miss. David's response suggests he's learned something from this experience about the nature of consequences and accountability. The man who tried to manipulate his way out of responsibility for his crimes with Bathsheba and Uriah now accepts divine judgment without attempting to bargain, negotiate, or escape. The death of this innocent child marks the end of David's illusion that he can control outcomes through clever manipulation and political maneuvering. Some consequences are inevitable, some judgments are final, and some prices must be paid regardless of your position or power. Bathsheba, meanwhile, has lost her first child to the same royal power that destroyed her first husband. She's experienced every form of loss and trauma that patriarchal power can inflict: sexual violence, forced marriage, complicity in murder, and now the death of her son as punishment for crimes she didn't commit. Yet the story isn't over. In fact, the most important chapter of Bathsheba's life is about to begin, and it will transform her from victim to power broker in ways that will reshape the entire narrative of Israel's monarchy. After the death of their first child, David and Bathsheba's relationship enters a new phase that's both more human and more complex than the violent circumstances of their first encounter. The shared grief over their son's death creates a bond that transcends the trauma of their beginning, and what emerges is something that looks surprisingly like genuine partnership. David comforts Bathsheba in her mourning, and she becomes pregnant again. This second pregnancy occurs under completely different circumstances. No deception, no cover-up, no innocent soldiers dying to protect royal reputations. Whatever this relationship has become, it's no longer the predatory power dynamic that characterized their first encounter. When the child is born, they name him Solomon, which means peaceful. But the text adds a crucial detail. The Lord loved him, and Nathan the prophet gives the child a second name, Jedediah, meaning beloved of the Lord. Think about the significance of this divine favor. The child born from assault and murder died as divine punishment, but the child born from whatever genuine relationship emerged from that trauma receives God's special blessing. It's as if heaven itself is acknowledging that redemption is possible, even from the most damaged beginnings. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn that most people miss. Bathsheba doesn't just fade into the background as another royal wife who produced an important heir. Instead, she begins a gradual rise to power that will eventually make her one of the most influential women in Israel's history. Ancient royal harems weren't just collections of beautiful women. They were complex political ecosystems with their own hierarchies, alliances, and power structures. The woman who could navigate these dynamics while maintaining the king's favor could accumulate significant influence behind the scenes. Bathsheba proves to be extraordinarily gifted at palace politics. She understands that her traumatic entry into David's household actually gives her unique insights into the king's character, insights that other wives lack. She's seen David at his worst and most desperate, which means she understands his vulnerabilities and psychological patterns in ways that make her invaluable as an advisor and confidant. As Solomon grows, it becomes clear that he's exceptional. He's intelligent, charismatic, and demonstrates the kind of wisdom that impresses even seasoned courtiers. More importantly, he shows no signs of the character flaws that plague many of David's other sons: the violence, impulsiveness, and entitled arrogance that will later tear the royal family apart. Bathsheba recognizes her son's potential and begins positioning him for succession, even though he's far from being David's firstborn or most obvious heir. This requires incredible political skill, strategic thinking, and the ability to build coalitions among palace factions that normally compete with each other. She allies herself with Nathan the prophet, the same man who exposed David's crimes and pronounced divine judgment. This alliance is brilliant political strategy. Nathan's moral authority and direct connection to divine will make him an unassailable supporter for Solomon's eventual claim to the throne. Think about the psychology of this relationship. Nathan destroyed David's carefully constructed cover-up and forced the king to face consequences for his crimes. But he also represents the possibility of redemption and divine favor for those who genuinely repent. By aligning with Nathan, Bathsheba signals that she and Solomon represent the redeemed version of the royal family, the possibility of moral leadership emerging from moral failure. She also cultivates relationships with other key power brokers, military commanders who respect competence over birthright, priests who value wisdom over tradition, and foreign diplomats who understand that Solomon's international perspective makes him valuable in ways that more provincial princes are not. But Bathsheba's most important political asset is her relationship with David himself. The king who once summoned her as a powerless victim now depends on her counsel and values her insights. She's become what modern political scientists might recognize as a chief advisor disguised as a wife, wielding influence through intimate access rather than formal authority. This transformation didn't happen overnight or through manipulation. It developed through genuine competence and emotional intelligence. Bathsheba understands David's strengths and weaknesses better than anyone else in his circle, and she's learned to provide the kind of counsel that helps him govern more effectively. David's other sons, meanwhile, are busy destroying themselves through the kind of behavior that demonstrates why birth order doesn't guarantee leadership capability. Amnon rapes his half-sister Tamar and gets murdered by Absalom in revenge. Absalom leads a rebellion against his father and dies in the attempt. Adonijah positions himself as heir apparent through arrogance rather than competence. Each crisis reinforces Bathsheba's position and Solomon's superiority as a potential successor, while David's older sons prove they've inherited their father's worst traits: violence, sexual entitlement, political manipulation without wisdom. Solomon demonstrates the kind of character that suggests he's learned from his parents' mistakes, rather than repeating them. Bathsheba watches these family dramas unfold with the strategic patience of someone who understands that the best way to win a long-term game is to avoid making short-term mistakes. She doesn't need to actively sabotage David's other sons. They're perfectly capable of destroying themselves through their own character flaws. Instead, she focuses on ensuring that Solomon develops the skills, relationships, and reputation that will make him the obvious choice when succession becomes necessary. She arranges his education with the best teachers, facilitates his relationships with important courtiers, and provides him with opportunities to demonstrate his wisdom and judgment. By the time David reaches old age, Bathsheba has transformed herself from victim to power broker, from traumatized young woman to queen mother in waiting. She's done this not through seduction or manipulation, but through competence, strategic thinking, and the kind of political intelligence that turns disadvantage into advantage. The woman who entered David's story as property has become a player in her own right, and she's about to orchestrate one of the most important transitions in Israel's history. The succession is coming, and Bathsheba is ready. David is dying, and everyone knows it. The man who once killed giants and conquered kingdoms now can't keep warm even under multiple blankets. His servants have found him a beautiful young woman named Abishag to serve as his personal attendant and help maintain his body heat. But the symbolism is clear. The king's vitality is fading, and the question of succession can no longer be postponed. This is the moment Bathsheba has been preparing for. During years of careful political maneuvering, all her relationship building, strategic positioning, and patient coalition construction comes down to this critical transition period, when the future of the kingdom will be decided. But she's not the only one making moves. Adonijah, David's fourth son, and now the eldest surviving prince, decides to force the issue. He's tired of waiting for his father to die or officially name a successor, so he throws a premature coronation party and declares himself king. It's a bold power grab that demonstrates both ambition and spectacular political tone-deafness. Adonijah's celebration includes many important figures: Joab the military commander, Abiathar the priest, and various nobles who believe supporting the eldest surviving son is the safest political bet. It looks like a strong coalition, the kind of establishment backing that usually determines succession in monarchies. But Adonijah makes a crucial mistake. He doesn't invite key people to his coronation party. He excludes Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the loyal military commander, Zadok the priest, and most importantly, Solomon and Bathsheba. This isn't an oversight. It's a deliberate snub that signals he doesn't consider them politically relevant to his claim. It's the kind of arrogant miscalculation that reveals why birth order doesn't guarantee leadership ability. Adonijah assumes that formal precedence matters more than actual political relationships, that titles carry more weight than competence, and that excluding your rivals somehow neutralizes their influence. He's about to learn otherwise. Nathan the prophet hears about Adonijah's self-coronation and immediately recognizes the threat this poses to Solomon's succession. Remember, Nathan has divine authorization for Solomon's eventual kingship. The prophet gave the child his second name, Jedidiah, meaning beloved of the Lord. From Nathan's perspective, Adonijah isn't just staging a political coup, he's opposing divine will. But Nathan is too smart to confront Adonijah directly or challenge the coronation through religious authority alone. Instead, he goes to Bathsheba with a plan that combines political urgency with strategic brilliance. "Have you not heard that Adonijah has become king without our Lord David's knowledge?" Nathan asks her. "Now then, let me advise you how you can save your own life and the life of your son Solomon." Notice the language. This isn't just about political preferences or succession planning. Nathan frames this as a life or death situation, which it absolutely is. New kings routinely eliminated potential rivals to secure their position. If Adonijah becomes king, Solomon and Bathsheba won't just lose political influence, they'll likely lose their lives. Nathan's plan is psychologically sophisticated and politically brilliant. Bathsheba will go to David first, reminding him of his promise to make Solomon king and informing him about Adonijah's premature coronation. Then Nathan will arrive while she's still there, confirming her account and adding his prophetic authority to her appeal. It's a perfect pincer movement, personal relationship combined with religious validation, intimate appeal backed by divine authorization. David will face pressure from both his beloved wife and God's prophet, making it almost impossible for him to ignore or postpone the decision. Bathsheba executes her part flawlessly. She goes to David's private chambers, where he's lying weakly with Abishag attending him, and delivers her appeal with perfect timing and emotional intelligence. "My lord," she begins, "you yourself swore to me, your servant, by the Lord your God, Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he will sit on my throne." This is brilliant political theatre. Bathsheba doesn't start with complaints about Adonijah or demands for action. Instead, she frames her appeal around David's own promises and commitments. She's not asking for favors, she's asking him to honor his word. "But now Adonijah has become king, and you, my lord the king, do not know about it." She delivers information rather than accusations, presenting herself as David's loyal informant rather than a political advocate. The subtext is clear. While David has been weakened by age and illness, ambitious subordinates have been making decisions that should be his alone. She continues with a detailed account of Adonijah's coronation party, who attended, what sacrifices were made, how the celebration was conducted. Then she delivers the crucial detail. He has invited all the king's sons, Abiathar the priest, and Joab the commander of the army. But he has not invited Solomon your servant. The exclusion of Solomon isn't just a snub, it's evidence of hostile intent. In ancient succession politics, excluding someone from the coronation was equivalent to declaring them an enemy. Adonijah isn't just claiming the throne, he's signaling that Solomon has no place in his kingdom. Bathsheba concludes with perfect emotional appeal. "My lord the king, the eyes of all Israel are on you, to learn from you who will sit on the throne of my lord the king after him. Otherwise, as soon as my lord the king is laid to rest with his ancestors, I and my son Solomon will be treated as criminals." She's painted the choice in stark terms. Act now to secure Solomon's succession, or condemn your wife and son to death through inaction. There's no middle ground, no compromise position, no opportunity to delay the decision until later. And then, exactly as planned, Nathan arrives. "Pardon me, my lord," Nathan says to David, "but have you declared that Adonijah shall be king after you, and that he will sit on your throne? Today he has gone down and sacrificed great numbers of cattle, fattened calves, and sheep. He has invited all the king's sons, the commanders of the army, and Abiathar the priest. Right now they are eating and drinking with him, and saying, 'Long live King Adonijah.'" Nathan confirms everything Bathsheba said while adding prophetic authority to the crisis. This isn't just palace gossip or family drama. This is a challenge to divine will that requires immediate royal intervention. The trap closes perfectly around David's weakened resolve. David lies in his bed, wrapped in blankets that can't warm his aging body, faced with the most important decision of his final days. Two of the people he trusts most, his beloved wife Bathsheba and God's prophet Nathan, have just informed him that his kingdom is being stolen while he's too weak to prevent it. The irony is devastating. David, who spent his youth as a fugitive from Saul's murderous jealousy, now faces the possibility that his own son will eliminate potential rivals just as ruthlessly. The cycle of royal violence that David hoped to break through wise succession planning is repeating itself in the next generation. But there's more at stake here than family dynamics or personal preferences. The prophet Nathan's presence transforms this from a political crisis into a spiritual crossroads. When God's prophet confirms that Adonijah has acted without divine authorization, David faces a choice between earthly expedience and heavenly will. "Call in Bathsheba," David commands, and she returns to his presence after Nathan's confirmation of her account. What happens next reveals the depth of relationship that has developed between the king and the woman who entered his life under such traumatic circumstances. David doesn't deliberate, doesn't request time to consider options, doesn't consult with other advisors. Instead, he makes a declaration that's both personal promise and royal decree. "As surely as the Lord lives, who has delivered me out of every trouble, I will surely carry out this very day what I swore to you by the Lord, the God of Israel. Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he will sit on my throne in my place." Notice the language David uses. He invokes the same God who delivered him from Saul, who established his kingdom, who blessed his reign despite his failures. This isn't just political maneuvering. This is David aligning his final act as king with divine purpose rather than human ambition. Bathsheba's response is perfectly calibrated. "May my lord King David live forever." It's the traditional acknowledgement of royal authority, but delivered at a moment when everyone knows David is dying. She's simultaneously honoring his decision and accepting the responsibility that comes with her son's elevation. David then summons his most loyal supporters: Nathan the prophet, Zadok the priest, and Benaiah the military commander. These aren't the establishment figures backing Adonijah. They're the people who've remained personally loyal to David, rather than positioning themselves for the transition. His instructions are specific and urgent. "Take your lord's servants with you and have Solomon my son mount my own mule and take him down to Gihon. There have Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him king over Israel. Blow the trumpet and shout, 'Long live King Solomon!' Then you are to go up with him, and he is to come and sit on my throne and reign in my place. I have appointed him ruler over Israel and Judah." Every detail of these instructions carries symbolic weight. Solomon will ride David's personal mule, a clear sign of royal authority and chosen succession. The anointing will happen at Gihon, Jerusalem's primary water source, symbolizing life and divine blessing. The ceremony will include both religious authority, Zadok the priest, and prophetic confirmation, Nathan, establishing Solomon's legitimacy through multiple channels. Most importantly, David specifies that Solomon should sit on my throne and reign in my place. This isn't a future succession, this is an immediate transfer of power. David is abdicating while still alive to ensure a smooth transition and prevent civil war. Benaiah's response captures the significance of this moment. "Amen. May the Lord, the God of my lord the king, so declare it. As the Lord was with my lord the king, so may he be with Solomon to make his throne even greater than the throne of my lord King David." The coronation unfolds exactly as David commanded. Solomon is anointed with holy oil, the trumpets sound, and the people shout their acclamation. The noise of celebration carries throughout Jerusalem, reaching even Adonijah's premature coronation party. Picture the scene at Adonijah's feast when they hear the commotion from the city. The guests are enjoying their celebration, convinced they're backing the winning side. When trumpet blasts and shouting indicate that something major is happening elsewhere, the confident atmosphere begins to shift as people realize they might have bet on the wrong horse. Jonathan, son of Abiathar the priest, arrives with devastating news. Our Lord King David has made Solomon king. The king has sent with him Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah son of Jehoiada, the Kerethites, and the Pelethites, and they have put him on the king's mule. Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet have anointed him king at Gihon. From there they went up cheering, and the city resounds with it. That's the noise you hear. The political calculations that seemed so solid an hour earlier now look like catastrophic miscalculations. Adonijah's supporters realize they've been outmaneuvered by a dying king, a determined queen mother, and a prophet who understands divine timing better than they understand political timing. Moreover, Jonathan continues with the detail that seals everyone's fate. Solomon has taken his seat on the royal throne. Also, the royal officials have come to congratulate our Lord, King David, saying, "May your God make Solomon's name more famous than yours, and his throne greater than yours." And the king bowed in worship on his bed. David's final act as king, bowing in worship while bedridden, perfectly captures his character. Despite all his failures and crimes, despite the trauma he caused and the consequences he faced, David's last recorded action is acknowledging God's sovereignty over his kingdom's future. The guests at Adonijah's feast don't wait around to see how the new king will deal with rivals. They scatter immediately, each person racing to distance themselves from what now looks like treason rather than legitimate succession. Adonijah himself, the would-be king who was so confident just hours earlier, flees to the altar in the tabernacle and grabs hold of the horns, claiming religious sanctuary because he knows his life is now in mortal danger. The succession crisis is over, Solomon is king, and Bathsheba, the woman who entered this story as a victim of royal power, has successfully engineered the transition that will define Israel's future. With Solomon's coronation, Bathsheba achieves something unprecedented in ancient Israel. She becomes the Queen Mother, a position that grants her more real power than she ever possessed as one of David's many wives. In ancient Near Eastern monarchies, the king's mother often wielded more influence than his wives, serving as chief advisor, political strategist, and the primary female authority in the royal court. This transformation is remarkable when you consider the arc of Bathsheba's story. She began as a victim of royal power, summoned, violated, and forced into marriage to cover up a king's crimes. Now she's the power behind the throne, the woman whose political acumen and strategic thinking helped place her son on David's seat and will guide his early reign. But Bathsheba's elevation to Queen Mother immediately faces a test that will determine both her political authority and her son's character as a ruler. Adonijah, the failed claimant to the throne, emerges from his sanctuary at the altar with what appears to be a reasonable request but is actually a sophisticated political trap. Adonijah approaches Bathsheba rather than Solomon directly, understanding that the Queen Mother's influence might be his best hope for achieving his goals without triggering royal suspicion. His choice to work through her also acknowledges her new status. He's treating her as someone whose word carries weight with the king. "Do you come peacefully?" Bathsheba asks when Adonijah requests an audience. It's a loaded question that reveals her political sophistication. She's not just being polite. She's establishing from the outset that any conversation between them must be conducted within the bounds of loyalty to Solomon's reign. Adonijah assures her he comes in peace, then makes his request. He wants to marry Abishag, the beautiful young woman who served as David's personal attendant during his final illness. On the surface, this seems like a modest request from a defeated rival. He's not asking for political position or royal privileges, just permission to marry a woman who never actually became David's wife. But Bathsheba, despite her apparent willingness to help, doesn't immediately agree. Instead, she asks Adonijah to explain his reasoning, and his response reveals both his continued ambition and his fundamental misunderstanding of how power works in the new regime. Adonijah begins with what sounds like acceptance of political reality. "As you know, the kingdom was mine. All Israel looked to me as their king, but things changed, and the kingdom has gone to my brother, for it has come to him from the Lord." This acknowledgement of divine will sounds humble, but it's actually Adonijah positioning himself as the rightful heir who graciously accepts God's mysterious decision to elevate his younger brother instead. He's not really admitting defeat. He's claiming moral superiority through magnanimous acceptance of an inexplicable divine choice. Then comes his request, framed as a small favor. "Now I have one request to make of you. Do not refuse me." When Bathsheba agrees to hear him out, he continues, "Please ask King Solomon. He will not refuse you to give me Abishag the Shunammite as my wife." Adonijah's confidence that Solomon will not refuse Bathsheba reveals his understanding of her influence, but it also suggests he's counting on that influence to overcome any political objections Solomon might have. He's essentially asking Bathsheba to use her relationship with her son to grant him something Solomon might otherwise deny. What Adonijah doesn't understand, and what Bathsheba probably recognizes immediately, is that marrying Abishag isn't the innocent request it appears to be. In ancient monarchies, claiming the previous king's women was a traditional way of asserting succession rights. Even though Abishag never technically became David's wife, her intimate service to the king during his final days gives her symbolic significance as part of the royal household. By requesting marriage to Abishag, Adonijah is essentially making a claim on David's legacy, and by extension, challenging Solomon's legitimacy. It's a sophisticated political maneuver disguised as a personal romantic request. Exactly the kind of move that demonstrates why Adonijah was dangerous enough to require careful handling even after his apparent defeat. Bathsheba agrees to present Adonijah's request to Solomon, But whether she recognizes the political implications or simply wants to test her son's judgment, she doesn't warn him about the trap embedded in this seemingly innocent appeal. When Bathsheba approaches Solomon, the text provides a beautiful picture of the respect and honor accorded to the Queen Mother. King Solomon rose to meet her, bowed down to her, and sat down on his throne. He had a throne brought for his mother, and she sat down at his right hand. This ceremonial recognition establishes Bathsheba's position clearly for everyone in the court to see. She doesn't stand while addressing the king. She sits on her own throne at his right hand, the position of highest honor and influence. Solomon's public demonstration of respect for his mother sends a clear message about her role in his administration. "I have one small request to make of you," Bathsheba begins, echoing Adonijah's language. "Do not refuse me." Solomon's response reveals both his love for his mother and his confidence in their relationship. "Make your request, my mother. I will not refuse you." It's a generous promise that demonstrates the trust and affection between them, but it also reveals Solomon's inexperience with the subtle ways political requests can contain hidden dangers. A more seasoned ruler might have asked for details before making such an open-ended commitment. Bathsheba delivers Adonijah's request. Simply, "Let Abishag the Shunammite be given in marriage to your brother Adonijah." Solomon's reaction is immediate and explosive. "Why do you request Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? You might as well request the kingdom for him too. He is my older brother." "Yes, for him and for Abiathar, the priest, and Joab son of Zeruiah." Solomon recognizes instantly what Bathsheba may have missed or chosen to test. This isn't a romantic request, it's a political challenge that cannot be granted without undermining his own legitimacy. The young king's sharp analysis of the situation demonstrates the wisdom that will become his defining characteristic. What follows will test both Solomon's resolve as a ruler and Bathsheba's influence as queen mother, while determining whether Adonijah's political maneuvering will succeed or seal his fate. Solomon's explosive reaction to Adonijah's request reveals that the young king possesses political instincts as sharp as his legendary wisdom. He immediately understands that what sounds like a simple marriage proposal is actually a sophisticated challenge to his legitimacy that cannot be tolerated. "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if Adonijah does not pay with his life for this request," Solomon declares, his anger transforming him from respectful son into decisive ruler in a matter of moments. This is Solomon's first major test as king, and his response establishes the tone for his entire reign. Unlike his father David, who often hesitated and allowed problems to fester until they became crises, Solomon recognizes threats quickly and acts decisively to eliminate them. The young king continues his analysis with brutal clarity. "And now, as surely as the Lord lives, he who has established me securely on the throne of my father David and has founded a dynasty for me, as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death today." Solomon's invocation of divine authority isn't just royal rhetoric. It's a theological argument that frames Adonijah's request as rebellion against God's will, rather than merely political opposition. By positioning himself as God's chosen king, Solomon transforms executing his brother from fratricide into righteous justice. He immediately summons Benaiah son of Jehoiada, the military commander who helped orchestrate his coronation, and gives him orders that are both simple and final. "Go, strike him down." Benaiah carries out the execution without hesitation or ceremony. Adonijah, who began this story hosting his own premature coronation, ends it as a casualty of his own political miscalculations. The man who assumed birth order guaranteed him royal authority discovers that wisdom and divine favor matter more than genealogy. The speed and efficiency of Adonijah's elimination sends a clear message throughout the kingdom. Solomon may be young, but he's not naive. He understands power politics, recognizes threats, and will act ruthlessly when necessary to protect his throne. Anyone thinking to test the new king's resolve should reconsider their plans immediately. But Solomon doesn't stop with Adonijah. Having committed to cleaning house, he systematically addresses every remaining threat to his authority, including the people who supported his brother's failed coup attempt. Abiathar the priest, who provided religious legitimacy to Adonijah's coronation, receives a different kind of sentence. Instead of execution, Solomon strips him of his priestly position and banishes him to his family estate. "Go back to your fields in Anathoth. You deserve to die, but I will not put you to death now, because you carried the ark of the sovereign Lord before my father David and shared all my father's hardships." This measured response reveals Solomon's sophisticated understanding of justice and political necessity. Abiathar's loyalty to David during the difficult years earns him mercy, but his support for Adonijah costs him his position, its punishment calibrated to the crime severe enough to neutralize the threat, merciful enough to honor past service. The banishment of Abiathar also fulfills an ancient prophecy about the downfall of Eli's priestly line, demonstrating that Solomon's political decisions align with divine purposes that stretch back generations. The young king isn't just securing his throne, he's implementing God's long-term plans for Israel's leadership. Joab, the military commander who orchestrated Uriah's murder and supported Adonijah's claim, presents a more complex challenge. Unlike Abiathar, Joab has blood on his hands that goes far beyond political miscalculation. He's been David's enforcer for decades, carrying out orders that kings prefer to keep hidden from public scrutiny. When Joab hears about Adonijah's execution and Abiathar's banishment, he recognizes that his turn is coming and flees to the tabernacle, grabbing hold of the altar's horns in a desperate attempt to claim sanctuary. It's the same strategy Adonijah used initially, but Joab waits too long and has far more serious crimes to answer for. Solomon sends Benaiah to the tabernacle with orders to bring Joab out for execution, but the old military commander refuses to leave his sanctuary. "No, I will die here." This creates a religious dilemma that reveals Solomon's respect for sacred law, even when it complicates political necessity. Rather than violate sanctuary by having Joab killed at the altar, Solomon finds a legal solution that honors both justice and religious obligation. Do as he says. Solomon tells Benaiah, "Strike him down and bury him, and so clear me and my whole family line of the guilt of the innocent blood that Joab shed." This is Solomon referencing Joab's murder of Uriah, the crime his father David ordered, but never directly punished. By executing Joab, Solomon cleanses his family line of the blood guilt that has lingered since David's adultery with Bathsheba and subsequent cover-up. The young king is finishing business his father left incomplete, dealing with consequences David avoided confronting. The execution of Joab marks the end of an era. The man who commanded David's armies, who carried out the king's darkest orders, who knew where all the bodies were buried, dies without ceremony at the altar he hoped would protect him. His death eliminates the last person who possessed detailed knowledge of David's crimes, and could potentially use that information to threaten Solomon's reign. Bathsheba watches these events unfold, with what must be mixed emotions. The elimination of threats to her son's throne validates her political strategy and ensures Solomon's security, but the ruthless efficiency with which he handles opposition reveals that her gentle son has inherited more of David's capacity for violence than she might have hoped. Yet there's also satisfaction in seeing justice finally delivered for crimes that went unpunished during David's reign. Joab's execution represents accountability for Uriah's murder, delayed by decades, but finally imposed by the son of the woman Joab helped victimize. Solomon's early actions as king establish a pattern that will define his reign: decisive leadership, respect for divine authority, and ruthless elimination of threats. But they also demonstrate that the young man raised by Bathsheba has learned crucial lessons about power, justice, and the price of political naivety. The kingdom is secure, the succession complete, and the Queen Mother's influence confirmed. The woman who entered this story as a victim has successfully positioned her son on Israel's throne, and watched him demonstrate the strength necessary to keep it. With the immediate threats to Solomon's reign eliminated and his authority firmly established, Bathsheba settles into her role as Queen Mother with the satisfaction of someone who has successfully navigated the most dangerous political waters imaginable. From victim to power broker, from traumatized young woman to the most influential female figure in Israel, her transformation is complete, but her story is far from over. The relationship between Solomon and his mother evolves into something unprecedented in Israelite monarchy, a genuine partnership between a wise young king and an experienced political strategist. Where David's reign was marked by impulsive decisions and reactive crisis management, Solomon's administration benefits from Bathsheba's hard-earned understanding of how power works, how people behave, and how seemingly small decisions can have enormous consequences. Bathsheba has lived through the complete cycle of royal power and its abuses. She's experienced firsthand how unchecked authority corrupts judgment, how palace intrigue destroys families, and how cover-ups create more problems than they solve. This knowledge makes her invaluable to Solomon as he establishes his own governing philosophy and administrative practices. Under her influence, Solomon's court operates differently than his father's. Where David's household was chaotic and driven by personal relationships, Solomon's administration emphasizes systematic justice, predictable procedures, and institutional stability. It's as if Bathsheba has helped her son learn from David's mistakes without having to repeat them. The famous story of Solomon's wisdom, his proposal to cut a disputed baby in half to determine its true mother, reveals not just his intellectual brilliance, but also his understanding of maternal love and sacrifice. Some scholars suggest this insight comes from watching Bathsheba navigate the complex dynamics of royal motherhood, learning to protect her children while managing competing interests and hostile forces. Bathsheba's influence extends beyond formal politics, into the cultural and religious dimensions of Solomon's reign. She helps establish the tone of sophistication and international awareness that will make Solomon's court famous throughout the ancient world. Her own transformation from victim to power broker serves as a model for how wisdom and patience can triumph over trauma and injustice. But perhaps most importantly, Bathsheba helps Solomon understand the difference between power and authority, between commanding obedience and earning respect. David ruled through charisma and military success, but his personal failures undermined his moral authority. Bathsheba ensures that Solomon's reign is built on more solid foundations: justice, wisdom, and genuine concern for his subjects' welfare. The Queen Mother's apartments become an informal center of power, where difficult decisions are discussed, foreign delegations receive private audiences, and complex problems get analyzed before reaching the king's formal attention. Bathsheba doesn't rule directly, but her influence shapes virtually every aspect of Solomon's administration. This behind-the-scenes power suits Bathsheba perfectly. She's learned that direct authority often comes with direct accountability and public vulnerability. Influence through relationship provides more flexibility and protection, while still allowing her to shape outcomes according to her understanding of what's best for the kingdom and her family. The irony is remarkable. The woman who was once powerless against royal authority now wields more influence over royal decisions than anyone else in the kingdom. She's achieved this not through manipulation or seduction, the tools traditionally associated with women in ancient courts, but through competence, wisdom, and the kind of strategic thinking that comes from surviving and learning from trauma. Bathsheba also serves as a bridge between different factions in Solomon's administration. Her grandfather Ahithophel's legacy gives her credibility with the old guard who served David, while her role in Solomon's elevation connects her to the new generation of leaders rising in the kingdom. She can speak to both groups with authority and help mediate disputes that might otherwise fragment the government. Her influence on Solomon's famous building projects, the temple and the royal palace complex, reflects her understanding that political power needs symbolic expression to maintain legitimacy. The magnificent structures Solomon constructs serve both practical and propaganda purposes, demonstrating Israel's prosperity and divine favor to both subjects and foreign nations. The Queen Mother's role in diplomatic relations is particularly important as Solomon expands Israel's international connections. Bathsheba understands that royal marriages, trade agreements, and cultural exchanges all have political implications that extend far beyond their immediate purposes. Her counsel helps Solomon navigate these complex relationships without compromising Israel's independence or religious identity. But Bathsheba's most significant contribution to Solomon's reign may be helping him avoid the personal mistakes that destroyed his father's moral authority. She's uniquely qualified to advise Solomon about the dangers of unchecked power, the importance of justice, and the long-term consequences of short-term decisions. Under her influence, Solomon develops a governing philosophy that emphasizes wisdom over force, justice over convenience, and institutional stability over personal preference. These principles will define his reign and establish standards of royal behavior that will influence Israelite expectations of leadership for generations. The transformation of Bathsheba from victim to mentor represents one of the most remarkable character developments in biblical literature. She doesn't just survive trauma, she converts her painful experiences into wisdom that benefits her family and her nation. Her story demonstrates that victimhood doesn't have to define identity, that trauma can become a source of strength rather than permanent weakness. As Solomon's reign progresses, and his wisdom becomes legendary throughout the ancient world, visitors to Jerusalem often remark on the unusual influence wielded by the Queen Mother. Foreign diplomats learn to cultivate her favor, understanding that her support can be crucial for successful negotiations with the king. This international recognition of Bathsheba's authority represents the ultimate vindication of her political strategy. The woman who once had no voice in her own fate now commands respect from kings and queens across the known world. Her transformation from powerless victim to influential leader serves as an inspiration and a cautionary tale about the complexities of power, justice, and redemption. The story that began with royal abuse and murder has evolved into an account of wisdom, justice, and the possibility of positive change, even in systems marked by violence and inequality. Bathsheba's journey from victim to queen mother illustrates that individual agency and strategic thinking can triumph over even the most difficult circumstances. But her influence on history extends far beyond her own lifetime, shaping not just Solomon's reign, but the entire trajectory of Israel's monarchy. Solomon's reign, under Bathsheba's influence, becomes the golden age of Israel, a time when wisdom, justice, and prosperity converge in ways that make the kingdom famous throughout the ancient world. The young king who began his reign by ruthlessly eliminating threats evolves into a ruler whose judgment and insight attract visitors from distant lands, seeking to learn from his example. The transformation of Israel during Solomon's early years reflects not just his natural abilities, but also the foundational wisdom he gained from watching his mother navigate impossible circumstances with intelligence and grace. Bathsheba's influence is evident in every aspect of his administration, from the systematic approach to governance to the emphasis on justice and institutional stability that characterizes his reign. The famous Queen of Sheba's visit to Solomon's court provides a perfect example of how Bathsheba's guidance shapes her son's international reputation. When this powerful foreign ruler arrives to test Solomon's legendary wisdom, she encounters not just an intellectually gifted king, but a sophisticated administration that reflects years of careful planning and strategic thinking. Bathsheba plays a crucial role in orchestrating the Queen of Sheba's reception. Understanding that this visit represents more than diplomatic courtesy, it's an opportunity to demonstrate Israel's emergence as a major power worthy of respect and alliance. The elaborate ceremonies, the display of wealth, and the careful choreography of the encounter all bear the marks of the Queen Mother's political sophistication. The questions the Queen of Sheba poses to Solomon, and his brilliant responses, occur within a context that Bathsheba helped create. The court's atmosphere of learning and inquiry, the emphasis on practical wisdom over mere intellectual display, and the integration of moral principles with political realism, all reflect lessons Solomon learned from his mother's example. When the Queen of Sheba declares that Solomon's wisdom exceeds his reputation, she's not just complimenting his intellectual abilities, she's recognizing the quality of his administration and the stability of his kingdom. These achievements result from the systematic approach to governance that Bathsheba helped develop during Solomon's early years as king. The construction of the temple, Solomon's most famous accomplishment, also reflects Bathsheba's influence in subtle but important ways. The project's successful completion requires not just architectural vision but also diplomatic skill, resource management, and the ability to coordinate complex international relationships, all areas where the Queen Mother's counsel proves invaluable. Bathsheba understands that the temple serves purposes beyond religious observance. It demonstrates Israel's wealth and sophistication, provides a magnificent setting for diplomatic encounters, and creates a permanent symbol of divine favor that legitimizes Solomon's reign. Her strategic thinking helps ensure that the temple's construction enhances rather than exhausts the kingdom's resources. The international alliances Solomon develops during his reign, including his marriage to Pharaoh's daughter, reflect negotiating strategies that bear Bathsheba's fingerprints. She understands how to leverage Israel's growing reputation into concrete political advantages, while avoiding the pitfalls that often accompany rapid expansion of power and influence. But perhaps most importantly, Bathsheba helps Solomon maintain the balance between confidence and humility that defines truly effective leadership. The young king who eliminated threats so decisively at the beginning of his reign learns to exercise power with restraint and to value wisdom over force as his primary tool for maintaining order and prosperity. The famous prayer Solomon offers at the temple's dedication, asking God for wisdom to govern justly rather than requesting personal benefits or military victory, reflects the values Bathsheba helped instill in him. The emphasis on justice, the recognition of human fallibility, and the appeal to divine guidance all echo themes that have shaped their private conversations about the responsibilities of power. Under Solomon's rule, Israel becomes a center of learning and culture that attracts scholars, artists, and leaders from throughout the known world. The court's reputation for wisdom and fair dealing creates opportunities for trade, alliance, and cultural exchange that benefit every level of society. This transformation doesn't happen automatically. It results from deliberate policies and consistent leadership that reflect careful planning and strategic vision. Bathsheba's role in developing these policies often remains invisible to outside observers, but her influence permeates every aspect of Solomon's administration. The systematic approach to justice, the emphasis on institutional stability over personal preference, and the integration of moral principles with practical governance all bear the marks of her guidance and experience. The prosperity that characterizes Solomon's reign creates opportunities for artistic and intellectual development that establish Israel as a cultural leader in the ancient world. The literature, music, and architecture produced during this period reflect not just material wealth, but also the kind of social stability and creative freedom that emerge when power is exercised wisely and justly. Solomon's famous proverbs and wisdom literature often reflect insights that echo conversations with his mother about the nature of power, the importance of justice, and the complexities of human behavior. The understanding of character and motivation that characterizes these writings suggests the influence of someone who has observed the full spectrum of human nature under extreme circumstances. The international marriages that Solomon contracts as part of his diplomatic strategy require careful management to prevent foreign influences from undermining Israel's religious and cultural identity. Bathsheba's guidance helps the king navigate these relationships in ways that secure political advantages while maintaining the distinctiveness that defines Israel's national character. As Solomon's reign progresses and his reputation grows, the Queen Mother's influence becomes a stabilizing force that helps prevent the kind of corruption and moral decay that often accompanies great wealth and power. Her own experience with the destructive consequences of unchecked authority makes her uniquely qualified to counsel her son about the temptations and dangers that successful rulers must constantly resist. The legacy of Solomon's early reign, the period most influenced by Bathsheba's active participation in governance, establishes standards of wisdom, justice, and prosperity that define Israel's golden age. The policies developed during these years create the foundation for sustained success and international recognition that will influence Israel's development for generations. But even as Solomon's wisdom becomes legendary and his kingdom reaches unprecedented heights of prosperity and influence, the seeds of future challenges are already taking root, challenges that will test whether the principles Bathsheba helped establish can survive the pressures of continued success and the inevitable transitions of power. As Solomon's reign matures and Israel's golden age reaches its zenith, subtle changes begin to appear in the kingdom that Bathsheba helped create. The young king who once listened carefully to his mother's counsel grows more confident in his own judgment, more impressed with his own wisdom, and gradually more isolated from the advisors who helped shape his early success. This evolution isn't sudden or dramatic. It's the kind of gradual drift that affects many successful leaders who begin to believe their own publicity. Solomon's legendary wisdom, his international reputation, and the unprecedented prosperity of his kingdom create a dangerous sense of infallibility that even Bathsheba's influence cannot completely counteract. The warning signs appear first in Solomon's building projects, which grow increasingly elaborate and expensive. What began as necessary infrastructure and appropriate symbols of divine favor evolves into displays of personal grandeur that strain the kingdom's resources and require increasingly harsh taxation and forced labor to complete. Bathsheba watches these developments with growing concern, recognizing patterns that echo her memories of David's later years when success bred arrogance and moral compromises. She tries to counsel moderation, reminding Solomon of the principles that made his early reign so successful. But her influence competes with the flattery of courtiers and foreign visitors who benefit from royal extravagance. The multiplication of Solomon's wives presents another area where the Queen Mother's guidance conflicts with her son's desires. What begins as strategic diplomatic marriages gradually becomes a collection that serves more to demonstrate Solomon's wealth and power than to advance Israel's political interests. Each new royal bride brings her own religious practices and cultural expectations, slowly diluting the distinctive character that defined Israel's identity. Bathsheba understands the political necessity of some foreign marriages, but she also recognizes the spiritual and cultural dangers of wholesale accommodation to foreign customs. Her attempts to discuss these concerns with Solomon meet with increasingly perfunctory responses from a king who sees international sophistication as evidence of wisdom rather than potential compromise of principle. The administrative burden of governing an increasingly complex and prosperous kingdom also creates distance between Solomon and the people whose welfare initially motivated his policies. The king, who once personally adjudicated disputes between ordinary citizens, now relies on bureaucratic systems that, while efficient, lack the personal touch that built his reputation for justice and wisdom. Bathsheba notices that Solomon's famous accessibility diminishes as his court becomes more elaborate and his schedule more demanding. The young king, who would spend hours discussing governance philosophy with his mother, now allocates brief audiences for even important matters. Confident that his established policies will continue producing successful results without constant personal attention. The international trade relationships that bring unprecedented wealth to Israel also create new forms of dependency and obligation that gradually constrain the kingdom's independence. Solomon's partnerships with foreign rulers, while profitable, require ongoing concessions and accommodations that slowly erode Israel's distinctiveness and self-determination. The Queen Mother observes these changes with the perspective of someone who has witnessed the complete cycle of royal power and its consequences. She understands that the same success that validates Solomon's wisdom also creates pressures and temptations that could ultimately undermine everything they've built together. Her efforts to address these concerns face the challenge of Solomon's growing confidence in his own judgment and his diminishing patience with advice that questions his decisions. The son, who once valued his mother's counsel above all other input, now views her warnings as evidence of excessive caution rather than hard-earned wisdom. The construction of temples for Solomon's foreign wives represents a particularly painful development for Bathsheba, who understands the theological and political implications of officially sanctioning foreign religious practices in Israel. While Solomon frames these accommodations as diplomatic necessities, his mother recognizes them as fundamental compromises that threaten the religious identity that distinguishes Israel from its neighbors. The increasing use of forced labor for royal building projects creates resentment among the northern tribes that will eventually fragment the United Kingdom. Bathsheba tries to warn Solomon about the long-term political consequences of these policies, but her concerns are dismissed as outdated thinking that fails to appreciate the requirements of managing a great power. The bureaucratization of Solomon's administration, while more efficient than David's chaotic personal rule, creates barriers between the king and his subjects that undermine the accessibility and responsiveness that characterized his early reign. The systematic approach that Bathsheba helped develop becomes rigidified into procedures that serve administrative convenience rather than justice and fairness. Solomon's intellectual pride, fed by constant praise from visitors and advisors, gradually replaces the humility and dependence on divine guidance that marked his early years as king. The man who once prayed for wisdom to govern justly now trusts primarily in his own understanding and experience, viewing outside counsel as unnecessary confirmation rather than essential input. The Queen Mother finds herself increasingly marginalized as Solomon's confidence grows, and his inner circle expands to include advisors whose primary qualification is their ability to implement his decisions rather than challenge his assumptions. The relationship that once defined royal policy becomes a ceremonial obligation that both parties fulfill without the genuine consultation that characterized their earlier partnership. Bathsheba's attempts to address these changes face the additional challenge of Solomon's genuine achievements, which make criticism appear ungrateful or unnecessarily pessimistic. The kingdom is prosperous, peaceful, and internationally respected. What grounds exist for questioning policies that have produced such obvious success? Yet the Queen Mother's experience with the hidden costs of unchecked power gives her insights into dangers that success can obscure. She recognizes that the same policies creating current prosperity also generate long-term problems that will eventually require costly solutions or produce serious consequences. The gradual erosion of her influence represents more than personal disappointment. It signals the loss of institutional wisdom and moral accountability that helped make Solomon's early reign so successful. The systematic elimination of critical voices and challenging perspectives creates the kind of isolated decision-making that historically leads to serious mistakes. As Solomon's reign continues its apparent trajectory toward even greater glory and international recognition, Bathsheba contemplates the irony that the success she helped create may ultimately undermine the principles that made it possible. The young king who learned wisdom through adversity now faces the more difficult challenge of maintaining that wisdom through prosperity. In the twilight of her remarkable life, Bathsheba reflects on a journey that spans the complete arc of power, from its most destructive abuse to its most enlightened exercise. The woman who entered history as a victim of royal violence has become the architect of royal wisdom, helping to establish principles of governance that will influence Israel long after her own voice falls silent. Her legacy exists in multiple dimensions, each revealing different aspects of her extraordinary transformation and enduring influence. Most obviously, her political achievements, engineering Solomon's succession, establishing the Queen Mother as a position of real authority, and helping to create the administrative systems that govern Israel's golden age, represent concrete accomplishments that reshape the monarchy's structure and expectations. But Bathsheba's deeper legacy lies in the lessons her story teaches about resilience, strategic thinking, and the possibility of converting trauma into wisdom. Her journey from powerless victim to influential leader demonstrates that individual agency and careful planning can triumph over even the most adverse circumstances, providing inspiration for anyone facing seemingly impossible challenges. The relationship she developed with Solomon offers a model for how wisdom can be transmitted across generations, how painful experience can be converted into practical guidance, and how personal healing can contribute to broader social benefit. Their partnership during his early reign shows how effective leadership often results from combining youthful energy with mature judgment. Her influence on Solomon's famous wisdom literatures is subtle but significant, evident in the understanding of human nature, the emphasis on justice and fairness, and the recognition of power's corrupting potential that characterizes his proverbs and teachings. The insights that make Solomon's writings timeless often reflect conversations with someone who understood both the best and worst aspects of human behavior under extreme circumstances. Bathsheba's story also provides a complex meditation on justice, responsibility, and redemption that challenges simple moral categories. Her transformation from victim to accomplice to power broker illustrates how circumstances can force people into roles they never chose, while still allowing space for dignity, growth, and positive influence. The institutional changes she helped implement, regularizing succession procedures, establishing systematic approaches to governance, and creating checks on royal power through advisory relationships, represent lasting contributions to Israel's political development that extend far beyond her personal involvement in palace politics. Her example influences expectations about women's roles in royal courts throughout the ancient world, demonstrating that intelligence and strategic thinking can be more valuable than traditional feminine qualities in determining political influence. The position of Queen Mother becomes more significant, partly because of the precedent she establishes for how that role can be exercised effectively. The moral complexity of Bathsheba's story, her simultaneous status as victim and beneficiary of the same system, her evolution from powerless object to influential subject, provides a realistic portrait of how people navigate impossible circumstances while maintaining dignity and working toward positive change. Her relationship with David, evolving from trauma through partnership to genuine mutual respect, offers insights into how relationships can heal and develop even from the most damaged beginnings. Their eventual partnership suggests that redemption is possible even for relationships that begin with violence and exploitation. The strategic patience Bathsheba demonstrates throughout her rise to influence provides a masterclass in long-term thinking and careful planning. Her success results not from dramatic gestures or risky gambles, but from consistent, intelligent responses to etenins and challenges as they arise over many years. Her ability to work within existing power structures while gradually changing them from the inside offers a model for effective reform that avoids the destruction often associated with revolutionary change. She demonstrates how persistent, intelligent effort can transform systems that initially appear completely resistant to modification. The wisdom Bathsheba gains from observing the complete cycle of royal power, its acquisition, exercise, and consequences, makes her uniquely qualified to advise others about the temptations and dangers that accompany success. Her insights help Solomon avoid many of the mistakes that destroyed other rulers' moral authority. Her story's integration into biblical literature assures that her example will continue influencing discussions about power, justice, gender, and redemption for thousands of years. The complexity of her character and circumstances generates ongoing interpretation and debate that keeps her lessons relevant across different historical contexts. The ultimate irony of Bathsheba's legacy is that the woman history initially remembered primarily as a figure in someone else's moral failure becomes recognized as a significant leader in her own right, someone whose wisdom and strategic thinking shaped one of Israel's most successful periods of governance. Her influence on Solomon's reign establishes principles: the importance of wisdom over force, justice over convenience, and institutional stability over personal preference that become standards by which future rulers are measured. These principles outlast both her direct influence and Solomon's own adherence to them. The transformation Bathsheba represents from victim to survivor to leader provides a template for understanding how individuals can respond constructively to trauma while working to prevent others from experiencing similar harm. Her story suggests that healing doesn't require forgetting the past, but rather integrating painful experiences into a larger framework of meaning and purpose. As her story concludes, Bathsheba leaves behind a complex legacy that resists simple moral categorization while providing rich insights into human nature, political reality, and the possibilities for positive change, even within flawed systems. Her life demonstrates that wisdom often emerges from adversity, that influence can be more valuable than authority, and that individual character can shape historical outcomes in ways that outlast any single lifetime. The woman who began as a footnote in David's story becomes a central figure in her own right, someone whose intelligence, resilience, and strategic thinking help establish foundations for justice and prosperity that benefit generations of people she will never meet. Her transformation from victim to queen mother represents one of the most remarkable character developments in ancient literature, a journey that continues inspiring and instructing readers thousands of years after her death. In the end, Bathsheba's story proves that even the most powerless can find ways to exercise influence, that trauma can be converted into wisdom, and that individual dignity can be maintained even under the most adverse circumstances. Her legacy challenges us to reconsider assumptions about power, gender, and moral agency, while providing practical insights into effective leadership and strategic thinking that remain relevant across cultural and historical boundaries. So there you have it, the real story of Bathsheba, a tale that makes modern political dramas look like children's bedtime stories. From victim to queen mother, from powerless to influential, her journey proves that the most compelling transformations often happen to people who refuse to let their worst moments define their entire lives. Next time someone tries to reduce her story to the woman who seduced a king, you'll know better. History, it turns out, is far more interesting than the simple stories we tell ourselves. Sweet dreams, and remember, sometimes the people history overlooks are the ones worth remembering most.